Back to the Infinity Podcast. Today I'm joined by Paul Higgs, a veteran developer, chartered surveyor, and one of the most respected land specialists in the UK. Paul is the founder of Millbank Group and Millbank Land Academy, where he's helped unlock over 7,000 homes and millions of square feet of commercial space through innovative land, planning, and development strategies. He's also one of the founding investors in LandTech, the PropTech pioneer behind Land Insight, and more recently, the co-founder of Viability, a new platform aimed at sustainable development decisions. Paul, thank you for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome, Paul. So, for the individuals listening to us who do not know your background, how you got started in development, could you give us a brief overview?
Yeah, so I wanted to be a developer since I was a kid. Although to start with, I didn't really know what it was all about. I thought it was all about construction. So I started off studying construction management. I became a site engineer and then a site manager. And on the side, that was sort of like my day job. Evenings and weekends, I started off doing houses up, so small refurbishments, things like that. And I slowly built up to bigger deals, and my did my first built my first new build house in 1988. Uh, and over those first 5 years or so in development, I started to realise that certainly in the UK, development really is all about understanding land and planning inside out. So spent the rest of my career trying to make myself a bit of an expert in that stuff.
You mentioned the RBS collapse previously when we first chatted. Can you tell us more about that and how it affected developers over in 2008?
Yeah, so certainly in the UK, and obviously all around the world, 2008, the global financial crisis was seriously painful for lots of people, including developers. Basically, the banks ran out of money. Now, at that time, 80% of my deals were actually funded by RBS. They were probably the worst people you could have been with in terms of development funders because basically they didn't really care about their customers or clients or developers. They basically just did anything and everything they could to, stop funding deals and get as much money back in as possible. So they pulled the plug on all the developments that I had ongoing with them at various stages. So that nearly sent me bankrupt, actually. I was literally survived bankruptcy by the skin of my teeth. I basically sold everything I owned and everything that I'd built up over the previous 20 years, really, in order to pay people back, make sure no consultants, no contractors, no one else lost money, only me. But that nearly wiped me out. It was only fortunately that one of my deals was funded by Close Brothers, who are a really reputable development funder, probably the best in the UK actually. And that one deal actually sort of saved me and helped me survive and then carry on when things picked up.
Do you think this event that happened to you changed your perspective on development? Like you need to be more careful or like just planning for contingencies in general?
Yeah, well, you know what? It's an interesting one, and I was talking about this to someone just yesterday. I have always been very, very detailed and very risk averse, and strangely, that actually worked against me. So my whole model has always, my whole career has been to find off-market sites. So there's very little competition, and I don't get sucked into situations where I'm bidding the land price up before I've even started. So I've always focused on off-market deals, and I've always focused on adding maximum planning and design value. So that means, I'm never paying too much for stuff. And I've largely certainly added an element of de-risking things before I've even started. So, I've created a little bit of an insurance policy. So I've got always got a load of equity, no, even if it's only sort of like notional equity or value in the deal. And on top of that, I've always put in a reasonable amount of my own equity so that I've been quite lowly geared. I've not been borrowing at really high levels. Weirdly, in 2008, that actually worked against me because what that meant is that there was a lot of value and there was a lot of equity in my deals. So RBS could pull the plug, take them off me, sell them, get all of their own money back, plus some. So those deals were actually the first ones to go. If I'd been borrowing 95% plus from the bank, so I'd owed them a lot of money, which lots of people did. In a weird way, um, I might have survived better off. So, I still wouldn't get overly geared, but it's interesting that actually thinking that I'd been sort of super risk averse and I was doing the sensible, safe thing, actually worked against me.
That's very interesting you mentioned that. And Paul, can you walk us through a couple of more economic downturns and cycles that you've been through and how they vary from the RBS one?
Yeah, I mean, it's the RBS one, 2008, was by far the most severe. I mean, basically, certainly in the UK, pretty much everyone ran out of money. Near the banks didn't have any money. You couldn't get development funding. The market was pretty much dead for probably 3 years, really. Started picking up probably about 2011, 12. But before then, really, there'd been a few crashes and downturns. To be quite honest, I couldn't even remember where when they all were. There was probably about four um, before that, but none anywhere near as severe, you know.
Right. And Paul, now switching over the conversation to PropTech and innovation. We're currently in an age where artificial intelligence is taking over and real estate, which is considered an archaic industry, it's being rebuilt. So I want to get your insights on PropTech and innovation and where you see all this headed in the future.
Yeah, I think without a shadow of a doubt, it is, of course, the way forward to a large extent in most industries. Um, Property development in particular is very complex. I often liken it to 10-dimensional chess because there's a lot of different people involved, there's a lot of different aspects to it. They all interact and affect each other. So when one thing changes, it affects everything. So properly valuing and appraising and modeling a development from a financial point of view has always been important, of course, and is really important. Now, a lot can be done with AI and things like that a lot quicker. Um, Obviously, as always, the key thing is, you know, how good is the data? Because obviously, when it comes to residual development appraisals, and viability assessments, etc., it's rubbish in, rubbish out. So, I suppose the good thing is, tech and AI can now bring all of that together, that information together much quicker. So, but of course, I think it is, development, that's all the science bit, but development is an art and a science. So whilst, tech and AI will absolutely, and already has actually made things much quicker, there is still an element of art and subjectivity to it. Now, at some point, maybe AI will be able to deal with all of that as well. I don't know. But yeah, look, it's making things easier, it's making things quicker, but of course, very often all it does is get you to the problem point quicker, which still has to be solved. And very often, certainly when it comes to dealing with landowners and negotiating deals, a lot of things are still going to come down to personal relationships and things like that. So whilst tech and AI can probably now, I'm going to say, do you know 80-90% of things, whereas maybe even 10 years ago it was just half of that. That final 10-20% still is going to come down to art and personal relationships and things like that. So I certainly hope actually that never gets taken away.
Yeah, I do completely agree, Paul. Last time you mentioned how the importance of the fundamentals was still something that was really important to have, even though we're, in this new age of innovation and whatnot. So Yeah, Paul, I
Yeah,
want to
no,
ask you
I
about.
forgot about that. I did mention that actually, and that's perhaps something else it's worth adding actually. As you know, I've got another business that trains property developers in the UK. I used to lecture on a master's degree in property development in the UK at Southbank University, and I think knowledge and of course experience is really really important. So whilst you could perhaps get chat GPT or something to go and give you a whole load of answers, it is still really important to know, well, okay, now what are those answers based on? Where does the information come from? How does it all fit together? Because, you know, if you were just overly reliant on effectively a black box without really knowing how it all fits together, that could and absolutely is dangerous actually, because I myself, at the moment, I use Chat GPT and some other things for a lot of stuff, but it's not always correct. Now I know that because I've been doing this for a long time, and I know a lot about this stuff. If I didn't know that, may be inclined to just believe what I'm being told, and that is potentially massively dangerous when it comes to development
Right.
and all actually.
Yeah. Paul, tell us more about land tech, land insight, and then where do you see this early on in the space?
Yeah, so land tech um, started just over 10 years ago now. So that is and was the probably fastest growing prop tech business in the UK. What happened there is a couple of guys had an idea for creating a bit of software to help self builders create find building plots. They then, of course, they needed investment, and they needed someone that understood the market and land and planning inside out. My name apparently cropped up quite a few times. We started talking. I could see the potential straight away, but realized it was way, way bigger than just single plots and self builders, because my way of doing things was still is actually was by being very detailed, getting a lot of information, piecing it all together, and that's the way I would find my sort of angles to beat the competition and get deals done. So I was already doing what land tech now does, like the slow old fashioned way. So when I first started talking to the guys and actually realized, like, shit, this can be massively streamlined. Obviously I could see the potential. I got involved. I was the founding investor. I knew exactly what it needed to do and how to do it from a sort of information point of view, because I was already doing all of that the old fashioned way. So that was obviously massively advantageous for that business. As a result, it did really well, grew really quickly, and actually became a very good business. So that was land tech, and then of course more recently, I've created viability, which is really a business designed to take over where land tech and some of the similar software leaves off. So there's all sorts of competition. There wasn't really when we started. There's lots of competition that helps you find potential development sites, but there isn't really anything that really answers the next question, which is, right, okay, here's a potential site. What is the best thing to do with it? How can I maximize the land value and get all of my numbers right to basically turn a potential opportunity into a deal? That's what viability does.
How do you see viability in the future within 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think it could and should and hopefully will be massive in more like 5 years rather than 10, particularly with AI now and the speed of things changing. So yeah, I would hope that it is and becomes the go-to platform, um, but basically, anyone that needs to value and assess and optimize the development potential of land.
Paul, I know sustainability is a big topic when it comes to real estate and net zero homes and all this as it relates to ESG. Can you tell us more about the construction practices behind sustainable development?
Yeah. So that's a really interesting question because I mean, of course, that is one of the big things that feeds into viability. So, you know, viability and i.e. basically getting deals to stack up financially to, you know, give you a sensible enough margin that's hopefully gonna de-risk things has always been, you know, the biggest issue in development. And as time has gone on, and certainly over the last, I'm going to say 3, 4, 5 years, you know, has become the key issue because of course as you know, costs increase and costs have generally increased for everything. And there are more and more requirements, you know, put upon development, amongst other things, to be more sustainable. Most of the time, you know, at the moment, you know, increased sustainability requirements does lead to increased cost. It just does. It's just a fact. And as you know, obviously interest rates have gone up quite a lot over the last few years. In the UK, we have many more planning requirements that we didn't have, you know, in the past. We've got biodiversity net gain, we've got nutrient neutrality, we've got water neutrality, we've got increased building regs, we've got a thing coming in called the Future Home Standard. We've got increased community infrastructure levy, which is basically land tax. We've got a thing called Section 106, which is another sort of land tax, which was meant to be replaced initially by seal, didn't get replaced. We ended up with both. So basically, what's happening is you know the land is being asked is to pay for more and more and more, and it's got to the point whereby there's not really a lot left in the land. You know, you can't beat existing use values, you can't maximize land values and still maintain the sensible profit margin with all of the various you know, additional requirements that are now put upon us. So being able to understand that and demonstrate that and sort of see the implication of all of these different numbers and requirements is really really important because what's happening now is as um, you know more cost is put upon land and development, more and more you know development becomes 100% totally unviable. So as a result, we don't get any development at all. We don't get any social housing, any affordable housing. We don't get any private housing. We don't get anything at all. So you know, whilst you know ESG, sustainability, you know, net zero and things like that are you know important things to be considered. They do need to be considered in the round because I think it's getting to the point whereby too much is being asked for, and as a result, it makes development totally unviable, which of course you know has all sorts of other knock-on implications for people and for housing and for society.
Paul, let's talk about the financing behind these projects. I think that was the point that you were alluding to because obviously when it comes to these projects, it incorporates the blended capital stack and so much different sources of funding. So I want to talk about this part.
Yeah, well, you know, obviously, you know, finance is just one of the many development costs. Um, finance costs have obviously increased over the last few years. What with increasing interest rates, and that's just something that you know, there's just an additional thing that makes development even more unviable. Now, you know, me personally, for example, my whole model for most of my career, for there was a 10-year stint in the middle when I used to work for the PLC house builders in the UK. Other than that, both before that and after that, for my own developments, my focus has always been on, as I mentioned earlier, finding 100% off-market sites and then securing them typically on option agreements, and most of the time actually on £1 option agreements. So I'm not generally spending a lot of money on land at the early stages. I'm trying to control it as sensibly and as efficiently as possible, whilst I buy myself time to add maximum planning value. Once I've done that, so effectively I'm creating notional equity and value in a deal before I've even started. It makes it much easier to fund things. Very often, a lot of my deals are also JVs, joint ventures with landowners, where I'm not even buying the land. So, for example, and I love those deals because it means I don't have to borrow to pay for the land. So again, that de-risks things as well. But even then, the way things are at the moment, I've got deals at the moment where I haven't paid for the land, and I've added big planning value before I've even started. But even then, a lot of those deals are very hard to get a sensible profit margin out of, just because of the massive increases in development costs. And also, actually, the market's been very slow in the UK the last couple of years. So, it actually takes a long time to get anything sold at a sensible price. So, I'm sure you've heard the phrase that time kills deals, and you've got a completed scheme that you've spent a lot of money on, and the units aren't selling. It doesn't take too long for the interest to start eroding any profit that was in that deal. So that's one of the other things that's making things very difficult at the moment.
Aside from the rising costs and development, what are some other issues that are affecting your portfolio at the moment?
Well, there's been a big, issue with planning in the UK for many, many, many years. Planning got increasingly complex, and it has continued to do so. Uh, in actual fact, the Labour government um, have made some very, very positive changes to planning. So, so they've actually done some really good things. But the problem remains the actual planning system. So local authority planning departments, that is massively, massively under resourced. So you can't get applications dealt with quickly. It's very uncertain. There's a lot of politics involved in the process. So even if you spend a lot of time and money negotiating a scheme with the planning officers at a local authority, the trained professionals, you can still very easily end up in a situation where a planning committee, the politics get involved, and you still get refused anyway. So that's still a really big problem, really. I guess the time, the cost, and the uncertainty of the planning process, and that coupled with the whole cost and viability issue is meaning the housing crisis that we've got in the UK. Even with the government trying to be much more positive and pro development, all of these things we've talked about are actually combining to mean that we've still got a big housing problem, and I can't actually see it being solved anytime soon.
Paul, over here in LA, we're facing very similar issues. The government, they say they're pro housing, pro development, but at the end of the day, developers are still facing the red flags and all the red stringencies as it comes to planning and commission check and plan check and all that. So it's interesting you mentioned that.
So
And
it's the same issues there, yeah.
same issues. It's in bigger cities such as Miami, San Francisco, New York, LA. Yeah.
Interesting.
Paul, I want to ask you, like looking at development holistically within the next 5 to 10 years in its incorporation with AI and commingling with AI, how do you see it in the UK?
Well, I can't see unless something fundamentally changes um in terms of development economics. I you know Even with AI, so let's just say, let's say viability, for example. One of the things we do with that is again, come exactly what I and many developers currently have to do the old-fashioned way. So, we assess all of the different options of development for a site. We come up with the optimum size, type, and mix of units, whether it be commercial, residential. Um, Look at all the different combinations of fitting that on a site. Look at all of the different ways of building things, modern methods of construction, properly cash flowing all of the different options and factor in that into the development appraisal to actually come up with the thing that is going to maximize the land value and have the very best chance of getting the deal done. So that in itself is massive, and without a shadow of a doubt, that will help people identify and do deals that they might have looked undoable, but just with better knowledge and analysis, it transpires that actually that maybe they could be made to work. So, without a shadow of a doubt, we will help get more deals done. But the development, economics and the fundamentals are still really, really tricky, in terms of the differential between costs and values and finance costs and margins, etc. So, even with all of the tech, improvements, let's call it, things are still going to be slow and tricky in the UK for the foreseeable future. And I think the only, we really need some sort of subsidies or incentives or tax breaks. Basically, something needs to happen in order to help development because the numbers have all just got so tight that many deals and schemes just don't work.
Sounds about right. And Paul, over the course of your career, I want to ask you, what's been the favorite deal that you've ever worked on, your favorite development?
Um, one of my favorites probably wasn't actually my own deal. It was probably during a period when I was doing deals for the big house builders. So say I mentioned worked for the biggest house builders in the UK for about 10 years. And when I eventually left them, they asked me would I still do a few deals for them and carry on working as a consultant because I'd become a very good land buyer. And at the end of the day, you know, developers that you need to be feeding the machine with land and planning permission so that they can keep their business going. So I ended up in quite a good position whereby I could really pick and choose the deals that I would go for based on how sexy they were and how much I liked them or whatever. So there was probably about 20 years ago now actually, which when I sort of first let last did some sort of major consultancy for the big developers. There was a site in the west of London. West London is really probably the hottest market in the UK because it's the most valuable market. So there's a GlaxoSmithKline's old head office was in West London. That site got put on the market, and because it was very well located, and it was suitable for commercial, it was suitable for residential, it was it was suitable for all sorts of things. There was a lot of demand from a lot of different users and users. So I really liked the site because it was very high profile. It was quite close to where I used to live. So I decided that I was going to go after that one in a big way and try to buy it for Barratt's, actually, the biggest developer in the UK, who I used to work for, and I carried on doing some consultancy for. And I ended up doing that deal, and I bought it for Barratt's while still maintaining a really good profit margin. And I really like that one because it was big and it was complex and there was massive competition for it. So as I've said, my whole personal model has always been off-market deals, and so it's minimizing competition. If you're the biggest developer in the country, you can't afford to do that. Anything and everything that comes to the market that's big enough, you've got to try to buy. And it's the same for all the big developers. So there was massive competition for that site, and and I actually managed to buy it by being super, super detailed in my research and analysis. Again, in those days, I was doing it the slow, old-fashioned way. Now, viability, for example, puts all of that sort of knowledge and experience and clever way of doing things for scheme and site optimization that I used to do and still do. Actually, the software now does that. In those days, there wasn't any of that, so it's just really sort of like my brains and my experience and my clever way of doing things that managed to come up with the right scheme, maximize the land value, get the deal done, and beat all of the competition while still maintaining a really good profit margin for the business that I was working for at the moment. So at the time, so again, so I probably really like that one because it was a really good example of beating all of the competition just by being more detailed and on it than they were. And then more recently, some of my own deals that are really focused on building with nature and biophilic design and looking after the environment and stuff like that that have won a load of awards. They've obviously tend to be much smaller deals. That last one I told you was sort of like 900 units, a tower, hotel, supermarket, load of commercial space, and all the rest of it. My deals are typically much smaller, but many of them have won lots of awards. So some of those have been my favourites as well.
That's amazing to hear, Paul. And over the course of your career, you've worked in finance, construction, development. What's kept you going? Like, what wakes you up in the morning and says, I still want to be a developer today?
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things actually. I When I was a kid, the only things I really used to like were art and drawing. And I then ended up in construction and decided I wanted to be a property developer. And it was only after some time that I sort of put the two and two together and realized that actually property development is one of the most creative things you can do. So, once you know what you're doing, you can see a site, you can see a building, you can see an opportunity, understand or imagine what it could be, and then hopefully if everything goes well at some point, you'll secure the site, you'll get permission for the site, you'll build it out, and then it will actually become what you imagined. Now, obviously, you have to do that in conjunction with architects and a professional team, but I think a lot of people don't realize they assume that, you know, spotting a site and something being created is what architects do. Absolutely, they do part of it, and we need them. But actually, I think the best developers probably in their heart of hearts want to be architects, and very often architects end up wanting to be developers because they realise that that is the only way that they're going to get many of their ideas, off of the drawing board. So I guess one of the things that I like about it that sort of keeps me going is it's a massively creative business. And on top of that, I guess I've always been very detailed. It is a complex business. I like trying to solve complex problems. And I've been a bit of a sort of workaholic as well, which is probably handy because, it is not an easy business and it's actually getting harder.
I completely agree. And Paul, now looking back over your career, like starting out, what would be the best piece of advice that you could give to your 25-year-old self?
Well, I've, obviously made a lot of mistakes, and there's a lot of things that I could and should and would have done different in hindsight. But I've also done a lot right, and I've learned a lot as well. So, and probably one of the key things that enabled me to do that is, firstly, I was very driven, to make stuff happen. I was at the same time, I guess, always thought very creatively, which was useful. But I was always, really, really, really detailed. So I wanted to know, everything about everything. I read, I studied. It was much harder in those days because, there was no YouTube. There was no online training and all the rest of it. There wasn't really anyone actually teaching you how to be a developer. So nearly everything that I learned was by trial and error. But I was always very detailed. I did always learn a lot. I studied every sort of aspect inside out, and I would recommend actually anyone in development, wanting to improve and grow, or anyone getting into development, that all of that still applies because it is a complex business. And the more you know and understand about how it all fits together, the more you will find, angles to get deals to work that maybe most of the competition will miss.
Sounds good. And Paul, where can people find out more about you, what you do, and Millbank Academy?
Yeah, so I think I always say, if you want to get into business or work with someone or whatever, it's fairly easy now. You like check them out on LinkedIn. You can see, and we all know that people can perhaps bullshit a bit, but it's not that easy. You can't make up too much really. So, check people out on LinkedIn. Go and check me out on LinkedIn. You can see my experience. You can see how and where to get hold of me, connect with me, send me a private message. My UK property development training business is called Millbank Land Academy. Obviously, you can Google that. Or as I say, but the easiest thing is just to find me and connect on LinkedIn, really.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul, for your time. I appreciate this interview, and it was great having you on.
No problem.
Awesome. Thank you.
So, yeah.
Bye-bye.